Level Up is a regular podcast that brings you topics to help you perform at work and in life at your very highest level. Your host is Dan Chiodo, an executive coach, corporate trainer, and author. He is president of Impact Training and Executive Coaching. And now, here's Dan.
Thanks, Jesse. Hey, thanks for joining me again this month for Level Up. Believe it or not, this is episode 66. We provide things for you to know that will help you grow. And today's guest has worked in the field of journalism since 2015. He has a diversified background, though. He graduated with a degree in economics. During his collegiate journey, he discovered his real passion was writing. In fact, he did a lot of that during the semester he spent in Ireland. Now, he leads a news team in Taos, New Mexico. Today's guest is the editor of the award-winning Taos News. This weekly newspaper continually wins national awards for its outstanding coverage. And speaking of awards, my guest is the winner of more than 20 journalism awards. And he has been a guest on BBC Radio, the CBC, and KNX News Radio in Los Angeles. So I'd like you to welcome my special guest, John Miller. Good to have you here, John.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
You bet. Let's explore a little bit of your history. Like some journalists, you come to the field in a somewhat unconventional way. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So I graduated from University of Denver in 2012, and I got, as you said in your intro, a degree in economics and then a minor in finance. But I remember as I was about to go to school, I talked to my parents and my friends, and my teachers in high school actually were really good English teachers. And I had originally wanted to go for English and history. So I kind of switched gears, but then I found that as I was going to school, as you get electives to take, all of them were writing focused. You know, I took poetry, I took fiction, rhetorical writing. So I might have, switched gears and maybe spent a little time in school. Focusing on writing instead. But, I wound up getting a business degree. But kind of as I moved along, I realized that I kind of really just, liked writing. I got out of school and I remember calling my dad on the phone one night and I would bounce different ideas off of him. And I just said, I'd really like to be a journalist, but I really wanted to find a way to write for a living. And being a journalist seemed like a really viable way to do that. So long story short, I started freelance writing in 2014, moved to Taos, New Mexico, and discovered that Taos had this really excellent little community newspaper. And so I built a portfolio and approached the paper and started with them in 2015.
That's wonderful. Let's go down a little side road here. A lot of my coaching clients would like to learn how to write. They're not sure where to start. So talk about that a little bit. Talk about how you got started and how you develop a comfort level in that.
Yeah. I think writing is a little different than like some other fields. Some other fields are really kind of predicated on academic pedigree. Writing requires that you, number one, have a passion for it. You're a big reader. All good writers are big readers, as I've found. And I remember that I developed an interest in writing, reading and writing, because my parents both had that interest. I remember that growing up, my mom and my dad almost always would go to sleep with a book. And even today, they're both still avid readers. And I grew up in Portland, Oregon. And on weekends, my dad would basically take my brother and I around. We go get breakfast, and then we go to a gazillion rare bookstores in Portland. And so he would take us around, and he was just always looking for like originals of classics. And So I just have a lot of memories of going into these like musty smelling old rare bookstores in Portland. And so I was exposed to it a lot as a kid. So it's kind of that foundation. And then as I went through school, as I alluded to earlier, I had some really good English teachers who really not only taught you just the technical aspect of good writing, but also, again, just exposed me and my classmates to really great classics like Jack London and Ernest Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald. So yeah, I just discovered a love for it throughout school, and that was kind of how I did that. And then in college, again, I just tried to identify different courses that would help me develop that skill, and just bounced ideas off of people. I have a friend who got an English degree in high school, and he taught English in Thailand for several years. And the way he and I would keep in touch sometimes is we would send each other like writing we were doing on the side just to bounce back and forth. So it really helps to have a good mentor and a good group of people who share that interest and you can develop that skill with.
That's excellent. Sometimes I will tell people there's a difference between a diary and a journal, that the diary will say what we did for a day, but the journal can explore a topic. Do you think that would be good for people to start writing a journal to show themselves that they may have an ability to write?
Yeah, definitely. That was something my dad always recommended. It was just like, if you want to be a writer of whatever sort, you got to do it every day. You got to have that regular practice, and a journal or a diary. That's a great way to do it. It's also therapeutic for a lot of people just to be able to think through things through the written word is really helpful.
That's very good. When you took the writing courses that you took, which ones were your favorites and which ones were the toughest?
I think poetry was the toughest. I really admire people who think that way, but it's interesting. Like journalism, even the gap between journalism and fiction writing is really huge. You can be a really good journalist, and then when it comes to actually sitting with a blank page and having to manifest like an entire world, an entire story that is cohesive and makes sense, that's what really you're using like a really different part of your brain for that. And poetry, I think, is again like there's some really great fiction writers who just poetry it doesn't translate. So poetry was the toughest. Probably the most fun was fiction, just because it did make me use that other part of my brain, and it wasn't like sitting down and writing an essay in college. It was really just you had that freedom to just tell whatever story you wanted. And so yeah.
That's great. So certainly you're embedded in the writing part. Going back to your financial background, study of economics, does that come in handy for what you do now?
Yeah, it does, especially being an editor now, having to manage a department, and that means managing finances, being able to understand where my expenses are, especially these days with the newspaper. Is definitely a valuable skill. And then I'd say too that I found when I was looking to get into journalism, I remember being concerned about the fact that I didn't have a degree in journalism, but I quickly found out that a lot of journalists don't have a journalism undergraduate degree or a master's per se. There are people with history degrees and finance like myself. So it's really a diverse field in that way. And I like the fact that it's very merit based. It's either you have the skill and the belief in what journalism is all about, or you don't. And so I'd also say that a business background, especially being able to read a spreadsheet, work in spreadsheets, use pivot tables, data journalism is really a really important skill to have, especially if you're applying for jobs at like the higher levels of journalism. Being able to have those skills is really, really valuable. So I'd recommend any journalist, even if they didn't get a business degree, to really try to develop those data skills, those financial skills.
That's really good advice. And I think sometimes with certain fields, you have to have the background, the education, the skill set to do what you do. But I think today I see in companies a lot of people who come on board and they have backgrounds in other areas, but that really enriches the organization because you get a different look about things. And I think that can be very helpful. You know, I wanted to mention this too. Just today, it was announced that Howard Schultz is stepping down again as CEO of Starbucks, and they've named a new CEO, and he is not from the field at all. And the Wall Street Journal had an article about it, and they said what he will bring is going to be essential, a whole new look about things. So I think sometimes that's what people like you do too.
Yeah, no, I know that you know as well from working with our paper that we just brought on a new circulation director who's not from journalism. He's not from newspapers, but he's done a really good job. He helped with a startup here in Taos County called called Taos Mountain Energy, and they create it's kind of like Cliff Bar. And he's just done an excellent job of helping us get our circulation numbers up. So I agree, bringing in an outside perspective can really be beneficial.
That's right. Now, let's talk a little bit about how you ended up in Taos. Did you make a trip there and like it, or how did you end up there?
My dad actually lived in Taos for about 10 years in the 70s. He lived here with his brother, and he was a construction worker here, and he just really fell in love with the area. And then when I was very little, my mom and my brother, we came through on a trip. But I hardly remembered that. But what I do remember is my dad always just had Southwestern art around our house as a kid, like Southwestern rugs and stuff like that. So clearly it was like a place that stuck with him. And then I did come through on a trip as an adult when I was in my early 20s. I came through to go skiing with a friend of mine at Taos Ski Valley. And then after a couple of years working in Florida, I was driving back through Taos County. And then a lot of people have this kind of story. I stopped in Taos. It was just supposed to be kind of a pit stop just to come back and enjoy myself for a couple of days. And I just wound up staying. I've been here almost 8 years now.
That is great. I get to come there about twice a year, and I find the place magical. So there's just something special about it. The Taos Convention and Visitors Bureau might want to take this clip. Because we've said it all. So this is a perfect time for a break. I'm Dan Chiodo, your host. My guest today is John Miller, editor of the Taos News in New Mexico. Much more to talk about on the flip side about his role as an editor, as a journalist, and what it does for the community. You are watching Level Up. We'll be right back after this.
At Express Employment Professionals
in Gulfport, Mississippi,
in Springfield, Illinois,
in Bend, Oregon,
in Champaign, Illinois,
in Corpus Christi, Texas,
in Jersey City, in Fishers, Indiana,
here in Knoxville, Tennessee.
We're on a mission.
We're on a mission.
We're on a mission. We're on a mission.
A mission. A mission. A mission.
A mission.
Mission.
We're on a mission to put 1 million people to work.
We are back. Thanks for being with us today. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that, and our guest today, I should say, is John Miller, editor of the Taos News. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that he's a very young person to hold the position that he holds. Well, what is that like, John, to be that young and to be in the field as editor of the newspaper?
Yeah, it's definitely. I didn't expect to become an editor in chief. I was 31 last year when I was hired to to become editor. But it's a huge privilege. I mean, I definitely had a bit of a, there's a bit of a learning curve being put in that position, but it was not quite as steep as I think it would have been, because I was assistant editor before that under the former editor, Stacy Matlock, who, taught me a lot about the field. She had worked at the Santa Fe New Mexican and had 25 years under her belt. So definitely wasn't something I expected, but turns out that it's worked pretty well. We have a really good team here now. And people seem really pleased with what we're all doing with the newspaper.
So maybe some people aren't sure what an editor does, don't have a clear idea of what you do. So give us a little taste of your day.
Yeah. So I'll just start with the most basic, which is I edit everything that goes into the paper, from stories that our reporters write to columns that our columnists submit, freelance writers, and basically manage production for our weekly newspaper. Our paper comes out every Thursday. And then we have a magazine editor, Michael Toschi, who's doing an excellent job. But along with him, I kind of oversee from a high level the magazines that we put out throughout the year. We put out more than 25 magazines, including some really beautiful glossy magazines, a winter visitor's guide, a summer visitor's guide. So Michael's doing a great job on that. And then I'm managing the department. We have a total of, 6 staff members, and there's all the managerial duties that go along with that, which were probably the newest things to me when I came back on board. You're just dealing with, any manager knows what I'm talking about. You're dealing with all kinds of different personalities and work styles, and you're trying to make all of that mesh and gel. And I'm really pleased that the team we have now does mesh really well. Being a smaller newspaper, it's really kind of it's more of a familial environment. If you go to the New York Times or even our sister paper, the Santa Fe New Mexican, both excellent papers, but it's a different operation because it's so much bigger than our own. But a lot of people really like that aspect of working here. The fact that you're tighter knit, you get to sort of have a closer relationship with people. You work directly with the photographer. So it's a pretty special place to work. And there aren't a lot of community newspapers like ours out there anymore. Something in the order of 2,000 community newspapers have closed since the year 2000.
Yeah, that's, and I've met with your team before, very inspiring folks. And, you use that word family, and it is like a family. I think that they do make a good team. And sometimes when you're a smaller team, you have to know a lot more because you have to do a lot more, don't you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's true of journalism in general. You have people call it like the kind of unicorn candidate. Lots of newspapers, even bigger ones, are looking for journalists who can really do it all. So if there are any young journalists out there that watch this or listen to this, as much as you can diversify your skill set, the better. I mean, that's true of every field, but especially with journalism as competitive as it's become. If you can not only write good stories, but you can also copy edit. You can also take strong photos. You understand something about video content, audio content, especially if you have the opportunity to go to school. Finding programs that really give you that broad experience will just really be a good investment for you when you seek a job in the field.
You bet. You bet. I want to talk a little bit about, situations where you want to do some great things, but you have a limited amount of money. So it's not just your field, it's most fields today. And sometimes we limit our thinking. We think that that's not possible because we could never afford it. But sometimes I think you ought to hold on to that dream. There may be a way. In the green room, you told me a little bit about a situation when you visited your parents and you were sitting there at breakfast one day. I'd like you to share that because I found that fascinating.
Yeah. So I was sitting at my parents' breakfast bar outside Portland, Oregon, and I was trying to find grants for our newspaper, and I was scrolling through LinkedIn and found an opportunity through Investigative Reporters and Editors, which, as its name denotes, is an investigative reporting agency. They're based out of San Antonio, Texas, and they were offering a grant last year to do what they call total newsroom training. It's they basically teach you about data journalism, about free tools that you can find to background people if your newsroom can't afford, one of the kind of the big backgrounding tools. And I just sent in the application. I was on vacation. I had time. And we got it. We were one of only 13 newsrooms in the country to get that training. And so we had that training last March. We did it over Zoom. They took us through just a crash course in that style of journalism. And it was excellent. It also made us members of IRE. And so it was, I'd recommend, if you're an editor out there, just to always be looking for those opportunities. There's lots of chances to find funding for special projects you're trying to do, whether it be a 6-month investigation or a video documentary. There's money out there to grab and professional development to give your staff.
Yes. I think that's just excellent. And that's available whether you're an editor or in some other fields that I have clients, and they are doing that same thing. They're searching for every grant they can find, and they're coming to realization. So it's a wonderful thing to see. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about the role of a newspaper. I don't know that some of our viewers think about that much. So the role of a newspaper, how would you address that?
Well, the role of a newspaper is to inform the public about what's going on in their communities, especially what's going on with their local governments. And one of the real problems with so many newspapers, like I said, 2,000 community newspapers like the Taos News that have shut down in the last 20 plus years, is that you have entire communities, especially in rural areas, that just don't have a clear view of what's going on with their governments. A lot of people in our community do attend town meetings and county meetings. So we're fortunate that we have a population that's really engaged, but other people in other communities may not be as engaged. And without a newspaper to bring that level of transparency to their doorstep and let them know, hey, there's a new town or county ordinance that could really impact you. The county is looking to raise property taxes, and you have a chance to voice your opinion on this. Keeping people informed about that stuff is the really critical function that newspapers serve, and it's why it's so important that this field keep going and continue to inform people at a high level. So that's really number one. And then it's also true that we also produce content that, sometimes we get a story that's just a good story to read. A story about somebody who's been successful or had a great adventure. And so there's an entertainment aspect to certain forms of journalism as well. But our number one focus is always to serve the community, to keep the community informed about the issues that are going to impact them.
Well said, well said. And for your newspaper, it has the news and the advertising that people need, but also you mentioned the publications. and the fact that your newspaper is really up on not just the fiber, but the cyber, as your publisher Chris Baker calls it, where you're doing both, and that certainly launches you into the future in a good way, I think. I wanted to also mention I was in that industry, and I remember all the letters to the editor. And I used to say, there's no other business that would plaster things that people disagreed with you on their windows for everyone to see. And yet, as a newspaper, we've never been afraid to do that, right?
Yeah, that's true. If you're going to be a newspaper holding people accountable, holding public officials accountable, it has to go both ways, right? So we definitely welcome feedback from the community. The opinion pages are obviously different in that I get a story from a reporter. I know that reporter does this for a living, and I'm going to vet that story. If you get a letter from somebody in the community, it's a little different. You sometimes don't know who this person is. Sometimes I have to send a letter back to somebody to say, like, if you're going to make this claim against this person or this organization, you really need to back it up with evidence. And I tell them, it's like, this is something I tell reporters to do too. You have to do your due diligence. But yeah, the opinion pages are a huge part of what community newspapers do. Every newspaper does. It gives people a chance to have their voice heard, to have it in print, which is a really, still in my opinion, the most powerful way to express yourself, is to have it in the written word on the page. There's a sort of permanence to that that even with how much is offered in the digital cyber realm, it's just not the same. And I hope it's something we never lose.
Mm-hmm. And along with that, as the news that you gather and everything else, and then weekly take a stand with your editorial, there are newspapers that are not doing that any longer, not putting in an editorial that speaks for the newspaper. Hats off to you, because you still do that. I think that's essential, don't you?
Yeah, it's probably one of the more difficult parts of the job. I remember that one of the more jarring things about going from being a reporter to being an editor was exactly that, just having to go from writing that I was so careful to remove myself from completely, to having to do writing that requires me to put myself in it and represent the editorial board here. So yeah, but it's something that we keep doing. It's a useful tool, something we have to use really responsibly. Just like with anything else we're putting in the paper, we've got to make sure that we're taking a stand that really makes sense and we've thought through carefully. So yeah, we continue to write editorials.
So it may be tough, but I have to ask you, can you think of one or two that made a difference in the community because of that stand you took?
Let's see. Last year, there was a public official who got a DWI, somebody who was really well liked. Everybody respected him. And I remember when we ran our reporting about the incident, there was some backlash. People were like, why are you putting a spotlight on this individual? He's done so much for the community. And I really thought about that. And I, sat down at my computer Tuesday nights to write my editorial and realized that this was what needed to be written about. And it was all about why we did that, why we reported on this person. And my stance on it was that his accomplishments as a public official were the reason why highlighting the incident were so important. Our public officials are meant to represent the best of us. And so that one was tough too, because I knew there was a part of the community that was really going to push back on that. But I think that people appreciated that. And then during wildfire season, this past spring, we had the largest wildfire in state history. that was just on the southeastern sort of corner of Taos County, just devastated Mora County. I wrote a couple editorials in there about that, just trying to draw support for our firefighters, reminding people just basic public service stuff about, clearing dry debris from around your house, making sure that you're ready to go in case there is a catastrophic fire in Taos County. So it's a useful tool in that way too. If we see something that needs to be communicated about public safety, we can make sure that's in the paper.
You bet. One final question. Where do you think journalism is headed in the coming years?
That is the $1 million question. And it's pretty tough to answer. I think that even if you talk to people who are working at the highest levels of the field, it's really uncertain where we're headed. We do know that social media continues to have a major influence on journalism, for better or worse. I think there's a lot of argument to be made that it's mostly for the worse. And so newspapers have been forced to play that game in social media and digital media. The advertising incentives sometimes create bad incentives. Our newspaper, I'm proud to say, is extremely ethical and judicious about how it separates those two parts of the business. There's a strict firewall there that, as long as I'm editor, will always be there, so that there's never any conflict of interest. But you have seen some publications that haven't followed that, precisely because of those pressures that those factors have created. So I think that there's really a time now for newspapers like the Taos News to really distinguish themselves and remind people this over here is not legitimate journalism, but what we're doing here, we're really doing legitimate, honest journalism where we're really trying to get at the truth. If there's a story that involves 5 different people, we always contact those 5 different people, no matter what. So there's a lot of pressures on journalism right now. It's very, very competitive. The cost, if you talk to my publisher, the cost of printing alone is massive. It's increased by like 38% just in the last year alone. So it is a tough field to be in, but I think that newspapers can continue to thrive by just remaining focused on quality journalism and avoiding those bad incentives, and just ensuring that they're keeping in mind the reason why we're journalists to begin with, which, as you asked me, what the purpose of a newspaper is, and it's to serve the public. It's to keep the public informed. So we're just remaining focused on that.
Excellent. John, thank you so much for sharing your life, for sharing things about your field and about the Taos News. Very, very helpful. Love it. Thank you so much again.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Appreciate it. Yes. I am Dan Chiodo, Level Up's host. My special guest today was John Miller. And again, we thank him for sharing all of this. We appreciate you being here too with us today. And we'd like to tell you there will be show notes from this podcast so that you can look at that, see what it means for your life. Dustin, another episode for the Level Up Library. Any final words for us? Mine will be cheers.
If you feel like this information was valuable to you, Dan would love it if you'd click the like button and subscribe to the channel. If you have any questions or thoughts about today's episode, please leave a comment. Also, if you're a first-time subscriber, be sure to ring that bell to be notified about future episodes. To learn more about what Impact's training and development can do for you and your business, visit impactbydan.com, where you can find more information about executive coaching, corporate training, keynote speaking, and much more. Thanks so much for watching.